Thursday, January 16th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. From the Churchill Falls MOU to Donald Trump and tariff threats, and getting ready for not one, not two, but three elections this year, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to politics, and I've got three MHAs here to break it all down and give us their takes. All right, so we've got a big discussion of politics for the next 55 minutes lined up for you all, talking about all of the big issues of this new year so far for 2025. And here's where you come into it, right? You're listening. The text line's open today. Emails are open. And I'm just curious for listeners across the province, what's the big voting issue for you this year, or issues? What's the most important thing on your list when you're thinking of voting? And yes, we have three elections, 1, 2, 3, right? Municipal, provincial, and federal. Don't know when a couple of them are going to be. Could be soon, could be later. It all depends on when decisions are made, but they are coming. So 709-327-8206 for the text line, which is open. You can text us anytime. The Signal at cbc.ca for emails. Here with me in the studio, we've got Lloyd Parrott, MHA for Terra Nova and PC Deputy House Leader, NDP Leader Jim Dinn for MHA for St. John's Centre, and Liberal Minister of Industry, Energy and Technology, Andrew Parsons, also MHA for Burgeo-Lapoil. I'll say Happy New Year. We're into it now, but Happy New Year anyways. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Let's set things up with there's some clips that have been making the rounds in the news, right? In Ottawa yesterday, the premiers met with the Prime Minister to talk about moves responding to incoming U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats that could apparently come on the first day even. While most premiers were on the same side, there was one person who stood out, Alberta's Danielle Smith. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford said Canada needs to use every tool in the toolbox in preparation, but Smith says she's more focused on protecting Alberta's oil patch. Here's a clip from our Premier, Andrew Furey, speaking yesterday about the situation with reporters.
This has been part of my concern from day one on this negotiation. We need to make sure that regardless of the acuity of the issue in front of us and the fiscal and economic realities, that we don't put on the table our Canadian identity and our Canadian unity. And by the way, I'm not convinced that that's what the president wants. He wants to have a fracture in our unity, a fracture in our identity, so that he can propagate his agenda of acquisition on a global stage. So I think it's concerning that we have an individual who isn't fully united. But I would say this, it's not that she has made a statement on one specific item. And it's unfortunate that it's not aligned with all the other premiers and with the federal government at this particular moment in time. But as to why she did it, or why she sees the need for Alberta not to participate in a strong and proud Canada, you would have to ask her that question.
All right, so that's Premier Andrew Furey. Like I said, inauguration Monday. Communique yesterday, signed by 12 premiers and the Prime Minister. There was a note appended to that document stating the government of Alberta did not approve the joint statement. Let's start with Danielle Smith here. Does this damage Canada's approach, and what does it mean for us in Newfoundland and Labrador? Who wants to? We'll go with Minister Parsons.
Okay, I'll lead off. No, I was glad to hear. I hadn't heard that clip from the Premier, and I'm glad to hear it. In fact, I think he carries a bit of weight, because when you think about the longevity of premiers, he's actually one of the longer serving ones now at this juncture, and has formed a relationship with other leaders. And I tend to agree. And I don't think it's a partisan thing. I mean, there's a mixture there of NDP, Conservative, PC, Liberal governments from across the country. I think Alberta seems to be putting forward an Alberta first and only approach. I get it. I get what they're trying to do, looking after them, but I don't think in the long run it will serve the province or the country well. And I do think there's some credence. I'm looking at what Premier Ford is saying up there, flying the Team Canada flag.
Big time for a team from Ford.
Yeah, and I personally think that's the right approach. I agree with that. And I think once you see some division or fracture, as they say, I think you exploit that to the detriment of everybody. So I think we need to continue on with that. That's just my sort of take on it.
Lloyd Parrott, thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the Premier of Alberta has her own agenda, which is separate from the rest of the provinces. You know, what I find disappointing is that the Premier has suggested that everything is on the table. And when we talk everything with Newfoundland and Labrador, we're a little different than most places. You know, oil and gas, seafood, precious minerals, lumber, all kinds of different things that we export here, and a lot of which goes to the United States. So to throw those things out and say everything is on the table before real negotiations have even started, I find that disappointing. I think it puts us in a situation of weakness, to be honest. But you know, we need a Team Canada approach. There's no question. Newfoundland needs to be a part of that. And you know, at the end of the day, Alberta is doing what they're doing with their oil because the reality of it is they have nowhere else to ship it. You know, that's their market. We can ship our oil globally. About 43% of our oil now goes to the States, but I believe that we have an opportunity where we can send it elsewhere. But make no mistake about it, this will be crippling to the country as a whole if the tariffs move forward, and we need a collective approach in order to stop, I guess.
Jim Dinn.
If I remember correctly, in a show in the last year, we were at when the you had asked a question about the 25% tariffs, and my thought is at that time, we're playing into his game. And he wasn't even president at that time, but he is sort of I guess, if nothing else, undermining or disrupting, and that's his tactic here in this situation. I guess I do believe we have to have a unified front, and if premiers are going separately, as long as they're singing from the same page. It doesn't help when one of the members publicly says that we do not approve of the statement because it plays into Trump's, I think.
Yeah, didn't show up, wasn't there for it, didn't sign it, was down at Mar-a-Lago, getting pictures with Kevin O'Leary, with Donald Trump. What kind of an impact do you think that can have on if there's no, that's not a Team Canada approach if Alberta's not part of it, right? That's a Team Canada minus Alberta approach.
Look, let me tell you, from my own experience with negotiations, at around the executive table, there will be differences of opinion, big time, and the approach. But we would never go out and give different. Not during negotiations. You have to show a united front. Yes, there are differences, and each province is going to have to make sure that its own interests are looked after. But in this situation, realizing that as Lloyd said, there's going to be pain. There's going to have significant pain. We've got to be united in this, because the minute that one person veers from that, we risk undermining or losing a lot more. So, to me, it's important to be united. Still fight hard for your own province and your own territory and jurisdiction. But at this stage, it's important to show that that this is going to hurt his base, probably more than he thinks. And secondly, it's there are an awful lot of resources that that U.S. depends on, and I don't know if he fully realizes that.
At risk. So I'm looking at some CBC reporting. According to Doug Ford, right, tariffs from the U.S. could cost up to 500,000 Ontario jobs. That's according to Premier Doug Ford. We're talking about oil and gas. The United States remains the primary destination for Canadian crude oil, receiving approximately 97% of Canada's crude oil exports in 2023. That's a market snapshot from the Canada Energy Regulator. Of that, and perhaps this is why Premier Smith is saying what she's doing, 87.4% of that volume is from Alberta. We're Newfoundland and Labrador, so Saskatchewan's about 9%. We're at about 2% of what gets sent down, but that's still like 2%. Industry minister, that's a lot of money, right?
Look, we're looking at, and it's all relative, but I mean, across the different industries we have, oil, gas, mining, fishing, pulp, paper, agriculture, we're looking at about 15,000 jobs is what we're dealing with here. And, I guess to go back to Lloyd's point, I mean, every province is facing a massive hit here, like the auto industry. You look at, you look in the prairies, and when we talk about agriculture and everything else. And so I understand what the Premier of Alberta is thinking, but it's a me first approach. And again, I think there needs to be a banding together. Every Premier could make the argument that they are going to get affected the most, because that's how we all feel. So I just don't agree with what Alberta is doing here. And in the long run, I actually don't think it's going to be a case of they do better than everybody else with that type of approach.
And you mentioned the 15,000 jobs, right? So I just got that email because it's from Director of Communications, Anna Quinton, Department of Finance and Treasury Board Secretariat. So this just came in a little while ago into my inbox as well from my CBC or Radio Canada colleague Patrick Butler. Upwards of 15,000 jobs could potentially be at risk if President-elect implements 25% tariffs in such sectors as fisheries, agriculture, mining, oil and gas, pulp and paper, like you were just saying. What do, like, on the opposition side of the room here, that number, I don't know if you knew it before or not, but this is the estimation. To hear that there could be up to 15,000 jobs at risk in this province, what does that mean for you? What are your thoughts?
So our messaging has been off too. I mean, the Premier said back at the end of November that he'd take a Newfoundland and Labrador approach, solidly. He was out in the media saying this. And then last night he said everything is on the table. Yeah. We need to look after our economic stance here in this province. There's no question about it. We need the right messaging, which we haven't had, and we need leadership that's going to push our people, our agenda, and our economy first. 15,000 jobs lost in this province would be catastrophic. We all know that. It's not. There's no question about it. I mean, if you're talking 15,000 jobs, if you're looking at losing the fishery and certainly the heavy industries we have when it looks at oil and gas and our mining industries, we're looking at complete communities disappearing, really.
So then what would you change? Like, when I've been to the States or I go to other parts of the world, people don't know where we are, who we are, whatever else, right? No matter what people say about musicals and this, that, the other thing, a lot of people do not know about us and our 540,000 people. What power do we have here to come out on our own and make some kind of a message?
Well, I would say the first thing is I don't see any reason for the Premier to go to the inauguration. I mean, it's merely a ceremony and it's a waste of taxpayers' money. And if priorities are looking after our people here in the province, then we ought to be here moving things forward in the right direction. Part of that is, whether it's the negotiations for Muskrat Falls, or Churchill Falls, whether it's securing other places where we can sell our resources and ensure that we don't have to rely on the United States to take them. There's a lot of different things that we should be looking at and we should have been looking at immediately after the election. And I'm not so certain that that's the case.
See, I'm sorry to cut in front of Jim, though, but I mean,
it could be a conversation. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
We bring up the point, and Adam's right here, and I see it all the time. I've said it a million times in the House. We are not a known quantity everywhere. We have to go elsewhere to press the case. Going to the inauguration is one part, but there's another thing that happens in Washington. They have the rest of the lawmakers there as well, the people we need to get in front of. This is not a case of going there, sitting at the Capitol, sitting on stage, and again, I think it is important to be there. All the premiers were invited. But what's more important is all the other meetings that are going to happen with American legislators, policymakers, deciders, influencers, consultants. That is important that we are there. We are not going to solve American tariffs sitting here. I think we need to go elsewhere, which is also why I continue to say, well, we need to go and sell Newfoundland and Labrador everywhere. When we talk about all we have, getting that investment requires us sometimes going to them. So that's why I disagree with Lloyd's point on that.
So should we have a Washington, D.C. office as opposed to this Boston office that we're planning?
So what I can say to you, being in New York recently, the biggest complaint I heard there is you should have one here.
In New York.
You look at the money that is there.
So why do we have one in Boston?
Because we have massive opportunities there when it comes to tech, when it comes to fisheries, when it comes to all these things. We are competing. Quebec has offices in Boston, New York, Washington, California, and in multiple.
Quebec often acts like it's its own
Absolutely.
country, and there's a whole other discussion there.
So do all these other provinces. I think, and this is what I hear from industry, so it's not just my point of view.
Okay.
But the markets for a lot of what we're doing are elsewhere. That's where we are going to get the money that comes back here, is spent here, and then again increases it. We need to have presence there. So going there is great and wonderful. Sometimes we, and I'm not saying we, I'm saying government, because it's not just this government, it's others. We need to think, we need to have a bigger view. We need to see the forest for the trees here and recognize that we are also competing against other provinces in terms of investment, which is why having that presence there. So, yeah, you can make the argument, why Boston, why Washington, New York, when the fact is that you could absolutely make an argument for each of them, but there's that balance, too, about the spending of taxpayers' dollars.
Okay. Jim Dinn.
Look, the first thing I think we need to realize, too, that in the state, it's not homogenous. There's a goodly number of people who know where Canada is and strenuously object to the language and the threats of the president. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think we should be concerned by the potential loss of $15,000, but we shouldn't be paralyzed by fear. And I guess my concern is that what is the president after? Because if this is about if we start going in the path of appeasement, it's going to cost us an awful lot more. I mean, he changed the NAFTA agreement the last time. So what is he after ultimately? I think I still come back to. While we're trying to present a united front, and we should, and use whatever levers at our disposal. I guess we can't be. The other thing is the creeping fear of if we don't do something, we will be. There's got to be some strength here and unity. So, from my point of view, before we start looking at. Before we go down the road of, what does he want? What do we need to do? Are we going down to negotiate, or say point out here's what we represent, here's how it's going to hurt you, or are we going to go down the path of appeasement? I don't think appeasement works. It doesn't work in negotiations. It doesn't work on the world stage. I think it comes to the fact that even the threats of the 51st state, buying up Greenland, buying up. I mean seriously. I got to wonder what school he went to, but at some point we got to realize that we're dealing with a man-child, mind you, a person who's got access to the nuclear codes and so on and so forth. But we've got to treat him with deference, no doubt about it, but at the same time with some strength. And that's my fear. Like $15,000, if we get focused on 15,000 jobs, if we get focused on that to the point where it's going to panic us into action, I think that's the wrong approach. But I think whether it's the Premier, whether it's Daniel Smith, or I don't care who, or whether it's united as a country, as long as we're singing from that same hymn book here and promoting the same message, any chink in the armor is not going to help us.
I think education's important in this too. There was some reporting I saw earlier in the week. Give a shout out, I guess, to all Newfoundland and Labrador.
They did great work
for an article that they did, where there were workers down at one of Synovus's plants in Ohio, and they had no idea whatsoever of what these were. Because I think we've all seen, even if you watch some of the news, I don't think a lot of Americans recognize. They think, well, the president's doing something to protect them.
Yeah.
But they don't recognize, and because they haven't been told, what the impact will be on them and the damage that they will sustain. And I think Canadians, we need to continue to let them know it ain't going to be all great for you and bad for Canada. There will be mutual damage here if we continue down the path.
I find it interesting that he's talking about a 25% tariff benefits, and without realizing that there's a natural consequence for the people in his country who are depending on these products.
Yeah, of course.
And I have a funny feeling that once his base, they connect the dots, they're not going to be happy as well. So I think that's a strength that's a strength that we can play on. It's like point out, this is going to have real consequences, and it's like 25% tariff is not just about punishing Canada; it's going to punish the people in your country
that's the messaging
as well.
that would have to come across. How long is the Premier going to be in D.C. for? Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea. I think the inauguration is Monday.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how long he's in Ontario for these premiums. I haven't seen the agenda.
Okay.
So I haven't seen what is lined up, although I think you're going to see other premiers and their teams that are
they
there.
were all invited, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I know Premier King of PEI took the tour bus down, filled it up with PEI industry players, and they took the bus down, and they're heading to Washington to do things like that. So there's things like that going on. So, again, don't know how long, but I do think it's important, especially the meetings, the bilaterals, and the other things that come along.
Well, this is my point. Are these meetings actually happening? Is it to go down for a couple grip and grins and to be there for the inauguration, or is it actually to spend some time to have some meetings to try to have to try to make inroads for the province?
I think when the Premier comes back that there will be a full recap of the steps taken and the actions taken in order to get in front of anybody and everybody. And, again, you're going to be looking looking at ambassadors' offices that are involved, governors, you name it. So I'd be interested to see myself what comes back.
So, Lloyd Parrott, what difference in an approach, like if it is going to D.C. to talk to others, not just to go there to be like, oh, the crowning of the new American president, or I mean, think of another way to say that, for the swearing in, I should say. What would a different approach be? Because to take Minister Parsons' point of just, well, there's a Boston office, or maybe New York, or folks in D.C., there does have to be, relationships are important.
There's no question relationships are important. And the first thing I would say is if these meetings are going ahead, then there should be an agenda that's put out to the public so we know exactly what's going on.
Right.
I mean, that could happen up front easy enough. To go and look for meetings, I don't think the timing is going to work. There's a lot of things happening during
Folks
this
are busy.
inauguration. Absolutely. So if you're going looking for meetings, I don't know that this is the right time to be doing it because of celebration and people being busy, the amount of people, security, and other things that are happening during this time. So, I get why he'd want to be there. I just strongly disagree with the whole premise of going. If there is meetings, then maybe that changes things, but we don't know that. It's pure speculation.
So where are you, both of your parties then with there's a Team Canada approach we're talking about, but then the Team Newfoundland and Labrador for being on board with what's happening? Because, I mean, there's you're not completely down with everything like you're saying. So where are we provincially with the opposition and how you feel? Like, when do you think it's time to start making more noise differently? Like, you're kind of saying it's now, but like what else? Like, Mr. Dinn, or if you've got thoughts on that, like you're saying together, you're saying, well, slightly different, but what else? Like, where are we for a Team NL approach here?
I think we're on the same page here. I think it comes down to, like, I will agree with Lloyd about the need to look for an agenda. I have no issue with any premier. I would assume if all premiers are going to take the approach, not going down to seek a meeting, but there are meetings arranged, and here's the agenda, here's what we're after. That makes perfectly good sense. I think from here, at this point, within the province, I would have to say, I'd have to believe that regardless of our political stripe here, and I would say for the independents as well, it comes down to we want to make presenting a united front against the president at this time, realizing that he's got some potential flaws and weak points as well. But I think it comes back down to it's still early in the game. But we have to keep an eye on the fact that, like, if there looks like there's a real threat to 15,000 jobs, then there's got to be something here to make sure that Newfoundland is proportionally bearing the brunt and not taking all of it. I think that's where it comes down to. I think that's the fear that, well, who always in the sense, are we going to be sacrificed? Is our resources going to be sacrificed to make an appeasement? And that's my fear, is if it gets into appeasement, what gets sacrificed?
Especially for a province that has 7 seats.
Exactly. So to me, I think and I would hope that in that situation, that regardless of political stripe, we're also going to make sure that, hold on, Newfoundland is not going to bear the brunt of this, and that we understand the need to to do what we need to do to protect the overall economy, but we can't be the sacrificial lamb as well.
Yeah, so we're clear. It's mixed messaging, right? So it was November the 27th, I believe, the Premier said, Newfoundland and Labrador first, and we have to protect our resources, there's no question. But last night, he clearly said that everything in Newfoundland and Labrador, from a resource standpoint, is on the table. And I get that. Every province is going to be expecting to step up to the plate. But we need to keep the people, the men and women that work here, the industries that support this province, sustainable. And part of that is looking at different approaches. I'm not saying that we do what the Premier of Alberta done.
So no Mar-a-Lago trip for you wouldn't be advising the Premier to go down to Mar-a-Lago.
And back to Jim's point, the reality of it is that the 25% tariff and the lack of education and knowledge in the States as to how that's going to affect them, here's the reality. Trump don't care.
No.
So, he just don't care. That's the reality. And if the Premier thinks that he's going down there to make inroads with Donald Trump, he's wrong. So we can talk to ambassadors and other people in different departments and try and get through, but nobody has gotten through to this man. And it's not a good situation.
Before we switch topics, I'll put it back to yourself for response, Minister Parsons.
I would just say that I don't think the Premier's going down to sit down at the White House with the President. But I do think that Republican lawmakers, once they recognize the impacts on their constituents and states, may be willing to listen. And look, there's a long game to this. This is going to take some time. And I think we're all on the same page here. You never know what you expect with this person leading that country, but you have to continue to do the work, and part of that is the outreach.
Yeah, and with the premiers going down, I mean, it might help with the crowd size this time. So we'll have to wait and just see what the crowd size is like on the National Mall there. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. We're talking politics here in the studio today. I've got three MHAs. We've got Lloyd Parrott, MHA for Terra Nova, PC Deputy House Leader, NDP Leader Jim Dinn, MHA for St. John's Centre, Liberal Minister of Industry, Energy and Technology Andrew Parsons, who's the MHA for Burgeo La Poile. Folks, as you're listening to us, I'm just curious, what are your major voting issues in this year of three elections? Where are your thoughts around where you're going to put your vote and what issues matter to you? Lots to talk about, lots to think of, right? Cost of living, climate change, Churchill Falls MOU. 709-327-8206 is the text line. The Signal at cbc.ca for emails. Churchill Falls MOU. You're probably tired of talking about it, but here we are. We're going to talk about it anyways. I was on Facebook earlier today, and I was getting ready for the show, and there's a Facebook ad. It's paid for by the PC Party of NL. An independent review, here's what it says. An independent review would show Newfoundlanders and Labradorians whether or not the MOU is the best deal possible for our province. The Fury Liberals formed a coalition with the NDP to hide the details. We are proud to stand up for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who want to make sure we aren't repeating the mistakes of 1969. So last week, MOU gets approved. You folks, you walked out in protest. My question, though, and I know this is a political ad, and I'm sure, I know you probably didn't write it, but the phrasing of the Fury Liberals formed a coalition with the NDP to hide the details. Do you really think they're trying to hide the details?
So I will say this. The MOU was brought to the House of Assembly, signed.
Yeah.
So it was done. The train had already left the station. Mm-hmm. The information that was put out there in the press and all of the briefings was not all correct. And that stuff was picked up in the House of Assembly. The bottom line is that regardless of what the minister says, mm-hmm. the LeBlanc inquiry was not followed. When they came into the House, they went directly to the seventh recommendation. They totally dismissed the first and the second. And there has been no independent review. And if you talk to the gentleman from Power Advisory or J.P. Morgan, they were very clear. They were hired for a very specific reason to handle very specific parts of this MOU, and they were only given certain information in order to come to their assertions. So, I don't think that the general public is comfortable with the MOU. I think everybody wants this MOU to work, including us. Mm. So make no mistake about it. Everybody wants this to be the best deal possible. And what we are saying is that the independents and the NDP who asked for this up front changed their mind midstream. Mm. And my guess is this would have went through and the MOU would have it was signed already. Mm. So, yeah, I mean, there's a coalition there, obviously. There's no question.
Mr. Dinn, is there a coalition?
The only coalition here is to find out if indeed to put partisan politics aside and come up with a mechanism where we could at least analyze this and report back. I will tell you, I'm more interested too. Not only in 1969 that we don't repeat the mistakes that of Muskrat Falls, which has a more significant financial impact on people right now. In the weeks leading up to the debate, I was very clear that that our party was very clear about having an independent review that could run concurrently. We sent a letter to the Premier and copied it to the leader of the official opposition and to the independents as to what this could look like. The independents were also pursuing an approach. So we said, well, we'll work together. We had the meetings with Minister Parsons on this, and there was concern that Minister Parsons had. We were all sharing. So at any stage, I guess the option was there for the official opposition to be part of this. In the end, the consumer advocate was chosen. It was one of the solutions I think put forward by the independents. We had gone back before we had agreed and to check with the people we had consulting to find out if indeed this would be a viable opportunity. They thought this was a very good a good way to do it, and it would be an advisable approach. The MOU may be signed, but it's also non-binding. It's a step along the way. I don't necessarily agree with how it was the whole MOU was introduced. I think it should have been introduced as a point of information as opposed to debate. But here we are. I think there was a genuine concern here to make sure that we could independently verify the contents of the deal. With that in mind, Adam, we sent a letter to the Premier and to the opposition and to the two independents as to what the terms of reference would look like. And one of the things we would like to see is to listen that the consumer advocate take into account the questions asked by the public and by the members of the House of Assembly in determining that. So I think what we're all after, I really want a deal that's going to work. Okay, I want to make sure that this is the deal. And if it's not, then we got some work to do. But we're doing it now as opposed to a final deal. So and it will be reporting quarterly to the House of Assembly and to the public.
Mr. Parsons, was it 2011 when you first got?
Yes, 2011.
So you were in opposition. You sat through Muskrat Falls.
I sat through the concept
Yeah.
of Muskrat Falls.
Yeah.
We didn't sit through a debate.
No, but the concept of Muskrat
Absolutely.
Falls, right? So you're there for that.
Yes.
And calls for the PUB and independent reviews, and we see what happens. Why wasn't there something in place why did it take an independent to say, hey, let's get the consumer advocate to do, why was there not something out front to say, here is an independent review with the PUB or someone else right away?
So a couple things. First of all, from day one, the Premier actually had already talked about independent oversight. It had already been mentioned. But I guess one of the values of having debate, and you're not going to put an unsigned MOU on the table. I don't think anybody realistically believes you're going to put an unsigned MOU on the table for that debate. But what we can talk about is the concept of it and see where the House sits on that. That's what governments do. Anybody who's ever been in government is not going to. I think they would agree with that. I think if me and Lloyd were to switch spots now, I don't think he would disagree with what I'm saying. He'd disagree with some of the finer points, I'm sure. But what I would say is we've always talked about independent oversight. But one of the values of the debate was to have an opportunity to talk about what does that look like? What does that mean? We've gotten away from the fact that, many people, and again, if you ask Power Advisory or JP Morgan, they would tell you that they are independent. But the point I always took really closely, and I think it's the point shared by Eddie and certainly by Paul Lane, who, when you listen to him in the House, voting for Muskrat scarred him. It still sticks with him. And so this wasn't about saying, no, sorry, JP Morgan or Stikeman's or whoever else. We're not saying you're wrong. We're saying that we still feel that you are a part of a process and that we want that oversight of the process. That's how we got to where we got, which was to have the consumer advocate come in and have a look at it. But the other thing, just a few things along the way. This is still going to be subject to intense scrutiny, both in the House, both outside. Even the presence of social media that is there now, that was never there before. It, amazingly still has some value, social media, although there's days I question it.
Depends which platform you're on,
It depends on what platform. So there's still going to be a lot of looking into. So I'll leave it there for now. But look, this is a chance of legislators are always saying, oh, we want to work together. We want to work together. Well, this was a case of actually, I think, working together.
Is there anything from what will happen with Dennis Brown as consumer advocate when they get together and the panel is formed? Is there a scenario where your party can look at that and say, you know what, actually, we like the work you did? Or is it automatically, no, he's a former back, albeit some time ago, I think to quote the Premier, the Liberal connections. Where are you in your party with that?
I would say once we know the politics is out of this, and I say that because you go back to December 12th, there was an announcement. No one, not independents, no one was invited until there was a request to go, and that's why our leader went. We had to ask if we could go. We didn't receive a technical briefing until we asked for a technical briefing. So this was a complete exercise in politics, and there's no question about it. If this was such an important deal, which I believe it can and should be, then politics would have been put aside right away, right from day one. It never was. So now here we are, when there's a mechanism in place to the LeBlanc inquiry, which cost $30 million, which the House leader was a part of for the entire time, that they overlooked. And make no mistake about it, they've overlooked it. We want an independent review that's done at arm's length from government that delves into and asks the questions that are important and pertinent to this. Mr. Brown had his opinion formed long ago. And somebody can say, well, he could change his mind. And yes, he could change his mind. But think about what his role is. He's the consumer advocate. He is there to protect people in this province, and he voiced his opinion very early. So whether or not he changes his mind, that's one thing. But he has already took a stand, and he's in a position of authority and in a position where it's a level of trust. And in my opinion, that trust is gone.
Is that not a worry point, Minister Parsons? To have him out to be like, hey, no, this looks like it might be an idea. Like he came out and said stuff. Is that not a worry point for you?
He is the first person that will tear strips off Newfoundland Labrador Hydro or Newfoundland Power when it comes to their yearly applications. I mean, my feeling is, look, I'm not convinced. I said in the House and I'll say it here, I'm not convinced there's a single thing we could do that would have pleased the official opposition. And I think if we did A, they'd ask for B. If we did B, they'd ask for A. The big thing I'd like to remind everyone is that, this could have been like former massive issues and it would never sat on the floor of the House. That was the first thing we did, was get everybody back in, because if we didn't do that, we would have wore that. So maybe I've been around a long time and feel cynical. Sometimes I just feel it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to take that criticism, but that comes with the territory.
Why not give the technical briefing early, though? I mean, the
technical briefing happened the night of.
It happened to everyone in industry and everything the morning before the announcement was made. The commercials were made and they were released the minute after. So there were lots of people who were in the know that weren't in government, the people that got the responsibility to debate this and sit down and go through it. So this was an exercise in politics.
That's the point I was going to ask.
Okay, so two things. Number one, yes, you're going to talk to industry who are not politically compromised in many cases and can say, they're going to tell you if they like it, they're going to tell you if they don't like it. What I will say is that the official opposition, and they could talk about, well, we never got the invite yet. You got the briefing literally the same day as the announcement was made that afternoon. Okay? I can tell you this now. Do you want to know how many technical briefings I got on Muskrat Falls? I don't know how things were done in Voisey's Bay, which did have a special debate. The briefing was there to the point where I just want to point something out. Other people came back, including the media, and said, well, we need another briefing. I had a media person say, we wanted another briefing. They got it. They asked for it. They got it, and stayed there till they literally had no more questions. So look, there's been no one from Hydro or anybody else that's turned down a single meeting or opportunity to answer questions. It's not there. I mean, there's no hiding of anything. That to suggest that is just beyond.
Adam, we had to request a technical briefing that day. So there was no invite to a technical briefing, so we're clear.
Okay.
So there's that. Then you got to consider, so as the minister said, and it's been said in the House, we always go back to Muskrat Falls. Well, we ought to have learned the lessons from Muskrat Falls. I didn't vote on Muskrat Falls. I will say this. It was an idea that was put forward and executed by the current Liberal government. And at the end of the day...
that's not true. You didn't read the... Go back to the LeBlanc report. 2013, that shit was sailed. Now, you know this, Lloyd.
So if we were to have that same inquiry today, tell me what it would say.
It would say the same thing that it said 4 years ago.
So all of that aside, the fact that there is no independent outside review of this, we haven't learned the lessons. That's my point.
Your opinion.
The next thing I would say is that the people that were there in that room being questioned clearly said, without Muskrat Falls, this wouldn't have happened. This is all under the Muskrat Falls EA. All of the groundwork and foundation has been laid because of Muskrat Falls, and that Gull Island could not go ahead without, not at the speed that they're saying Quebec needs it. So there's a whole lot of other things.
There's a whole lot of history here. We could go back to the deal that was originally done by Premier Grimes that got scuttled. We can go back to the conversations that led to Muskrat. But I'm coming back to the point. You know as well as I do, to say that the Liberals executed this project in the contracts, you know that is patently false. You know that. Now, you can say that the recommendations were not followed because, that's your opinion. But to say the otherwise would go literally against what Justice LeBlanc said in massive stacks of documents and in an executive summary. And yes, I'd like to think we learned the lessons. Believe me, we paid enough for them. And I know you weren't involved in it. I mean, geez, I'm not implying that. In fact, there's no one on that side except for your House leader who, he wasn't an elected member, but like he says in the House all the time, he was around. you guys weren't there, but I tell you what, we sure as hell learned the lessons from this. I mean, believe me, it's still it guides just about every decision, because it's like it's still fresh on everybody's mind. All of our constituents still, they use that now as the term to compare it to everything else. If you were to do something bad now, Muskrat Falls.
Yeah, because the juice is still running, right? $1 billion of interest a year. Just let me go to Mr. Dinn first.
Look, I'll speak from Jordan and my point of view, and certainly when Alison was there, we've had to listen to the jibes and over Muskrat Falls for the last, going on 6 years. The second part of it comes down to, when it comes to the independent inquiry. I would say we do have it right now. No, nothing's perfect in this world. But I will say this, that Mr. Brown, yes, may have initially had formed that had expressed an opinion. At that time, I would have said it was a good deal. I've had time to sit with it since, and it needs an independent review, which I also understand that Mr. Brown has very clearly said it needs an independent review. So it wasn't full steam ahead. It needs to be reviewed. He has been a vocal critic, so I've still got and plus there are parameters around. He's going to have a team with him as well, and we'll make that judgment too by that way at that time as to on the committee. But there's very clearly the power to choose the committee lies in his hands, and I would assume that in his reputation as being a vocal critic is going to matter more than the opinion. So I think at this stage, put aside the. I've been struggling to look at this in terms, Adam, of does it make business sense? Does it benefit the people of the province? Does it protect the environment? Does it provide the jobs? And that's basically what we're after here. We've asked for regular reporting. What we eventually settled on was quarterly reporting, which would make it regular. So the first report could very well be, I had this conversation with Eddie and Paul and the minister about having it before the House finishes sitting in June, so we could have the first go around. And at that point, I think then we can start having make the further conversation on the surface. Like the whole thing is that these that the experts they have were independent. Yes, they were independent from the point of view of advising the negotiating team. They weren't working for Hydro-Quebec, but what we're looking for, it was very clear, and this it came through, is how do we have someone to check the overall work and make sure that what we're getting here, because there were some valid questions asked and there were some concerns raised, and if I listen to the questions, I might say, well, this is a bad deal. If I listen to the answers, I said, it makes sense. So in the end, I don't purport to be an expert, but I'm going to be asked to make a decision on this at some point. And I think, let's do that independent review through the Consumer Advocate, or the Public Utilities Board. But I think that would require some legislative changes when it comes to the Labrador exemption. So let's move forward. But that's the only way we're going to try to resolve this and take the politics out of it.
Did you want to do a quick follow-up there, just for the end?
Yeah, so I'll reiterate. Our concern has and still is. I don't feel it's independent, nor does our leader, Tony Wakeham. So there's that. Then the misinformation that came forward. I mean, he mentioned Jordan. Jordan was of the thought that this power would flow into Labrador West immediately, and we know now 2031, 2036, 2 different offtakes of power. It's a ways away. I've received emails from high-ranking people inside of IOC and Takora telling us to push back on this deal. This is the people that are depending on it. I've offered to show the emails to the NDP. They didn't want to see them. So at the end of the day, I believe that the independence that we haven't achieved, we have not achieved independence here. Now, Mr. Brown can probably come in and tear everyone apart. There's no question. But if we had an independent panel up front do the review before it came to the House of Assembly, and we had the facts in front of us to vote on, it would have changed the water on the beams. And the minister said he doesn't know if there's anything that could have changed it. what could have changed it is if we followed the LeBlanc inquiry.
Could you show me those emails? Because you never offered those emails to me, and now I'm feeling bad. You offered them to Jim, but you didn't offer them to me, Lloyd.
Yeah.
I will tell you this, that Jordan on that day that was offered, he said no. He had already been in contact with the Corps. Patently false. That from their point of view, there's a good deal. Actually, if I understand, Nippon Steel has now looked at investing in the steel industry because of this deal. So the fact is, Jordan has made it very clear from day one that this is going to benefit Labrador. It's going to actually have the positive impact his district needs and solve a lot of the problem. He's not talking to the janitor on the or the person who may not be involved, but he is talking. He has direct contact with the managers, with the owners, and that very clearly this is a good deal.
Okay.
And the fact that you have a company from Japan, this is giving them the security to start making plans. I think from his point of view, this from Labrador's point of view, it's going to be a benefit. However, very clearly, we've been very consistent in the need for that review to make sure that indeed the benefits are there as they claim to be.
Yeah, what is it, $245 million, right, for Kami Iron Ore Project, Nippon Steel? Yeah. This is also there because they might be getting shut out from the States. There's a Biden bit there. But anyways, lots of questions that can be talked about later. Before I move on, do you have you been, Minister, have you been hearing anything out of Labrador to what Mr. Parrott was saying there?
Nothing but positive. I have the same context, which again, what I'm saying to Lloyd is if he's hearing these concerns, by all means, I mean, I am there to listen. But in all of my contacts with anybody, there's a lot of excitement because the power was the big issue. And in most cases, it actually jives with their development and permitting timelines. But always open to hear and listen to people.
And now for something that I think none of you will like. Kelly Bladuke, an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Memorial University, analyzed the debates around the MOU and was on the morning show, St. John's Morning Show, talking to host Jen White. And he made a comment about political parties in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm just curious what you think. I think we've got that clip there now, so let's give that a whirl.
We know there's going to be a provincial election sometime this year, as you mentioned. But how could things change if another party other than the Liberals forms the next government?
Well, that's an interesting situation. And that would have been, again, if we had come to this with something like the PCs saying, look, we don't think this is a good deal. We'll negotiate a better deal. We won't accept this. That would have put them in a very different position going into this. And we might have actually seen ourselves having an election that was really about, is the deal a good one or a bad one? As it is, I don't know what they're thinking. And quite frankly, I don't have a lot of faith in any of the parties that when they're in power, they're going to do a good job. I think if the PCs were governing right now, they'd have brought us something very similar to what we're looking at. They'd have taken the same position and said, look, we don't need external experts. Okay, finally, maybe we'll sort of use them. They would have done the exact same thing. And the Liberals would have been there saying, oh, no, but the Muskrat Falls inquiry. So we have a history in this province of all the parties really kind of taking largely the same positions and being largely the same when it comes to the policies and the behaviors. So, if someone else is elected, they might make a bit of a show of it, but I'm guessing we'll end up with largely the same thing.
What are our thoughts on that?
I don't know. Maybe the cynic in me says as a political scientist that doesn't like politicians or politics. But
yeah.
The one thing I was going to agree with is that this is more of a bigger thing, but like we've always talked about it. Sometimes when it comes to political parties in Newfoundland, this is not about Churchill or the MOU. It's not as pronounced a gap as there is amongst federal politics in terms of ideology. I don't think
the gap's not there.
It
right?
is not there. In many cases, I'm sure people have looked at various Liberals and said, man, they're hard right on certain angles. Or I've seen progressive conservative decisions that seem very left. And then I've seen the NDP who were purportedly left. They were, very center line on issues. And it all depends on what the issue is. I think it goes to say is we all do share a sense of what we need in Newfoundland and Labrador and have some tinkering on the vision.
Given the social spending here, you could make the argument that a few of the governments have been NDP governments in a way too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure Jim Dinn will disagree with me on that one.
They're NDP because of our influence.
But I do think there's a shared sensibility.
Right.
Now, yes, you'll get very pronounced difference of opinions on different things, but it's not the same as federal. Sometimes the big thing, and when I hear people like Professor Bladuke, who look, I got the greatest respect for, though, but it's a big difference between teaching it and actually having to sit there and be through it and go through it. And it's a whole different ballgame, and I'll leave it at that.
Lloyd Parrott, what do you think?
I would say we've all earned our political science degree in the House of Assembly. So it's a different world. And what I would say is there is differences. There's no question. And the difference truly lies in the approach and the outcomes. And when we sit here and we talk about the difference right now between the Liberals and the Conservatives, I think that clearly we are going through a time in this province where healthcare, the cost of living, unemployment, all things that matter immensely are bubbling to the top. And we got a government now that tries to deflect away from some of those issues and bring different things forward. We're in an election cycle, and that's a lot of what's happening right now. And sadly, it's the people of Newfoundland and Labrador that get left behind. Do I think that the end goal for any of the parties is different? No, I don't. So I think that's philosophically where he is.
Yeah.
But I do think that our different approaches and our different ways of getting from point A to point B.
You folks election ready? You got all your candidates nominated yet? Where's the nomination process?
Yeah, so we're well into all of that. We're ready to go, yeah.
And so now, how many candidates are you looking to put out this time?
We're looking at filling them all. Is what we're. I will tell you this: it is difficult to get people to commit to something when they don't know when the election date is. If it's a fixed election date, then they've got time to plan. But people I would have asked last year are now expecting an election last year. That's the commitment issue.
Is it hard to get because there's 4 minutes left of the show? The salaries where they are and not being increased. Is it hard to recruit talent right now to join your parties? Because if you're talking for folks to leave jobs, there is that discussion, right? It's a big gap and maybe you can't go back to your career afterwards.
Yeah. It's a significant challenge. I'll say that, right?
Mr. Parsons?
It's absolutely an issue, but even going into politics now, you bring up the point earlier about consumer advocate. You have any political feelings or opinions earlier in your life, and they're held against you, and there's reasons why certain professions are not represented. But anyways, it absolutely has.
And you're leaving, right?
The only thing I can tell you about the next election is I'm not in it.
How does that feel?
Doesn't feel any different yet because I'm still so involved in the job and I'm not going out like a person. I'm going out till the minute I'm not there. So you could probably ask me that later on this year whenever the election is, it'll probably hit me then. I did really enjoy last week though because it was one of the better debates. That sometimes I think I'll miss that. I'll admit that that time there.
Final thoughts, Mr. Dinn?
I think it's for a lot of people it's a big step to go into the limelight or to be the front person to take to make the decisions so it's a challenge and for someone who's leaving a job that might be paying a lot more, that's going to have a significant impact for sure.
Lloyd Parrott?
Yeah, so I would say things have changed dramatically in this role as a job as an MHA. When you look at social media, the demands, time spent on the road, less members in the House of Assembly, all the things that have changed. So it's harder to recruit people for a reason, and I think a part of that boils down to the pay and benefits. And at the end of the day, if we are to make this province a better place to live for the people that inhabit and love and call this place home, we need to find a way to do things better as a government, and I think that the opportunity is coming up in the next election for people to make a change, and we're the right voice.
Well, if they're going to make a change, they're going to have to vote for it.
Yep, absolutely.
I had to get that last dig in, Lloyd.
And then last question for you, Mr. President: when's the election?
The honest to God answer.
Yeah,
I don't know, because if I knew, I could probably have a better idea of when I'm going and where I'm going and what I'm doing next, and I don't have a heck of an idea.
All right. Had to ask. I was just curious. Thanks for this today.
Thank you.
I appreciate the political discussion. I appreciate us trying to tear apart some of these issues and talk about it. I think it's important to do it. So thank you, all three of you, for this.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that is it for today's show. So thank you very much. Here in studio, we had Lloyd Parrott, MHA for Terra Nova and PC Deputy House Leader, NDP Leader Jim Dinn, MHA for St. John's Centre, and Liberal Minister of Industry, Energy and Technology, Andrew Parsons, MHA for Burgeo-Lapoile. So, folks, that is it for today's show. If you have thoughts on today's show, thesignal@cbc.ca. cbc.ca. If you want to call the signal line and leave us a message, 709-576-5260. And I'm curious, what's the political issue that's important for you, or issues that will influence your vote in the next year of 3 elections, right? Municipal, provincial, as well as federal. And we'll just wait to see when those come. Looking ahead to tomorrow, we bring you a special episode of The Call with Amanda Gear, a meeting place for Indigenous communities, voices and stories, a show about reconciliation. You'll hear Amanda's documentary called The Joy of Being Inuk. While some members of the Inuit choir can't speak Inuktitut, they can sing in the language. Diantha Edmonds, Canada's first Inuk professional opera singer who leads the choir, has been researching and revitalizing old Moravian Christmas carols in Inuktitut, and you'll hear all about it tomorrow. Don't miss it. Cheers.